They have long been recognized as the backbone of the United States Army.
Ladies and gentlemen, the creed of the non-commissioned officer.
No one is more professional than I.
The corporals, the sergeants,
I am a member of a time-honored corps.
the proud warriors who so adeptly perform as small unit leaders, trainers, and guardians of standards.
Competence is my watchword.
They are respected for their professionalism,
I will strive to remain tactically and technically proficient.
for their commitment to knowledge,
I know my soldiers and I will always place their needs above my own.
and for their enduring capacity for selfless service.
I will not forget.
Nor will I allow my comrades to forget.
That we are professionals. Non-commissioned officers.
Leaders.
Congratulations on your acceptance and commitment to the Non-Commissioned Officer Corps. Take this manual as a guide to train and challenge our soldiers.
Non-commissioned officers in the U.S. Army share the pride of a rich history of accomplishment. NCOs were crucial in transforming General George Washington's Continental Army into a battle-worthy arm, capable of going up against British regulars on the battlefield. On the western frontier, NCOs accepted responsibility for leading scouting parties to locate enemy forces. During the Civil War, they embraced the deadly task of carrying the colors so commanders could locate and maneuver their units. When the flag moved, the lines moved as well. In World War I, squad leaders began supervising fire teams instead of just individual soldiers. During World War II, Korea, and Vietnam, young NCOs continued to refine their effectiveness as small unit leaders. The leaders of the American Revolution drew on the military traditions of Europe as they created an army. But in the fighting that ensued, the Army evolved, and the role of the American NCO became unique. It was during this time that NCOs first assumed the role they continue today as guardians of standards. In 1779, former Prussian General Friedrich von Steuben, Washington's appointee as Inspector General of the Army, wrote the first regulations for duties and responsibilities for non-commissioned officers. During the Revolution, the new Army developed a system for the identification of NCOs through the use of different colored epaulets to distinguish rank, duties, and branches. From the beginning, NCOs have served bravely and with distinction in America's armies. 3 sergeants in the Continental Army received the newly created Badge of Military Merit for acts of heroism. Today, we call this award the Purple Heart. The evolution of NCOs continued through the 1800s. In 1812, red sashes and swords were added to the uniform for sergeants and above to distinguish their positions as non-commissioned officers. A few years later, in 1821, the Army changed the rank identification system again. NCOs were identified by chevrons rather than epaulets and sashes. Some units wore the point up and some down. By 1851, however, all units wore the chevrons with the point down and would do so for more than 50 years. The first school for instruction of enlisted men opened at Fort Monroe in 1824. Though suspended from time to time, it served as a precursor for modern technical training. The Abstract of Infantry Tactics, published in 1829, provided instructions specifically for training NCOs. The purpose of this instruction centered on ensuring all NCOs possessed an accurate knowledge of the exercise and use of their firelocks, of the manual exercise of the soldier, and of the firings and marching. In 1840, NCOs adopted the distinctive sword they still use today. It has always been more of a symbol of rank than a weapon of war. because it is ill-balanced. Training of NCOs continued to evolve in the second half of the 1800s. In 1869, the Signal Corps established a school for training officers and NCOs at Fort Whipple, now known as Fort Myer. This school, along with the reopening of the artillery school at Fort Monroe in 1870, helped Signal Corps and artillery soldiers gain the advanced technical knowledge needed to operate complex equipment and instruments. The early 1900s brought several changes for NCOs. In 1902, the Army decided that chevrons should be worn with the points up, and they are still worn that way today. A few years later, in 1909, the Non-Commissioned Officer's Manual more clearly defined the duties of the NCO than previous publications. The growth of warfighting technology in the 20th century continued to influence the NCO Corps. The demand for specialists grew with the development of increasingly sophisticated armor, aviation, motorized transport, and chemical warfare. The Army was forced to compete with industry for technical workers and compensated NCOs accordingly. World War I required the first massive training the U.S. had seen, and NCOs trained 4 million soldiers. During World War II, the Army re-engineered the 8-man infantry squad to include 12 soldiers, and the sergeant replaced the corporal as its leader. Corporals by tradition had been combat leaders. They lost prestige when they no longer commanded squads. Today, there are relatively few corporals in the Army. The Army created the Women's Army Corps in 1943. WAC NCOs performed such diverse duties as motor pool mechanics and drivers, as well as clerks and radio and telephone operators. Ever since, female NCOs have been an important and productive element of the NCO Corps. Throughout World War II, NCOs continued to distinguish themselves. In the post-World War II era, the Army dropped technical ratings as it placed emphasis on service-wide standards for NCO selection and training. More than ever before, it encouraged young soldiers to become better educated in order to advance their careers. Emphasis on the NCO education resulted in the implementation of a career guidance plan and the founding of NCO academies right after World War II. Both became precursors of the present Army personnel and school systems. It was during the Korean conflict that the Army began to racially integrate and fight on the battlefield side by side. In 1958, the Army added the E8 and E9 grades for NCOs. These additions completed the grade structure we still use today. The Vietnam War brought considerable change to the NCO Corps. In Vietnam, NCOs assumed much of the burden of combat leadership. To train the large numbers of new NCOs needed for combat, the Army created the Non-Commissioned Officer Candidate Course at Forts Benning, Knox, and Sill in 1967. It was the immediate precursor of today's NCOES. William O. Wooldridge was chosen to be the first Sergeant Major of the Army in 1966. His mission was to advise the Chief of Staff on all matters pertaining primarily to enlisted soldiers and their families. Wooldridge helped establish the position of Command Sergeant Major in 1968, a move which further enhanced the professionalism of NCOs. Today, the U.S. Army Sergeants Major Academy, located at Biggs Army Airfield, Texas, writes all NCOES Common Core lessons. In 1991, Operation Desert Storm spotlighted the professional NCO in action. Over 300,000 Army troops forced Iraq to concede to a ceasefire after only 100 hours of ground combat. After-action reports from Somalia and Kosovo celebrated the professionalism, bravery, and selfless service of non-commissioned officers. Sergeant First Class Randall Shugart and Master Sergeant Gary Gordon, each equipped with only a sniper rifle and a pistol, endured intense small arms fire from the enemy in Mogadishu and fought their way to a dense maze of shanties to reach a critically injured helicopter crew that had crashed. Their actions saved the pilot's life. Now in the early years of the 21st century, the war on terrorism continues to demand a rapid military response from soldiers trained to peak levels of readiness. In the aftermath of terrorist attacks on America, our military active duty, reservists, National Guard, and Department of Defense civilians were called upon to demonstrate without a doubt what America was made of. When joint multinational forces entered Afghanistan in Operation Enduring Freedom, soldiers had to adapt and excel in warfighting circumstances on challenging terrain. Meanwhile, force protection at home stations depends on combined efforts of troops not deployed. During Operation Iraqi Freedom, coalition forces brought the oppressive regime of Saddam Hussein to an end and began the process of rebuilding this long-suffering country with a flag of freedom. After more than 2 centuries of evolution, effective training continues to be the cornerstone of operational success. The NCO Corps has proved to be up to speed in meeting rapid response challenges and is eager to fulfill a meaningful role in the Army's transformation to the future force. As the leader most responsible for individual and small unit training, the NCO is vital in building the foundation for the future. The professionalism of the Corps today is largely due to its ability to manage the force with the interchangeability of positions, the establishment of the non-commissioned officers education system to foster common standards, and the creation of the position of the Sergeant Major of the Army, who is the spokesman both up and down for the Army's NCO Corps. In every organization, pride is born from individual achievement and knowledge of the organization's rich history. The history of the Non-Commissioned Officer Corps gives us great reason to be proud. The objective force, we salute the non-commissioned officers at all levels.
Ladies and gentlemen,
they are our hope, our pride, and our future as they begin to write the next chapter in the history of the NCO.